Hey guys, what's happening? Grincherz here, back with another video. Today I'll be doing deck tech number 7, Lilithe Swarm. Now, this has been an archetype that I've loved since probably Shimzar or so. I didn't really enjoy it a whole lot back in beta or right after One Draw. It was more Big Abyssian related. The full Swarm strategy has been around for a little while since One Draw came about, but I haven't really touched on it in any of my videos, and today I wanted to do that. This deck in particular that we are talking about today is the one I chose to finish off my climb to S rank this season on one of my accounts. I ended up going 12-2 in Diamond, and I'm fairly certain it could continue that sort of win rate if I were to play it more. That is because after the Worlds meta has ended and the Grandmasters have been crowned, it would appear that people are more willing to experiment, basically branch out from Vanar and Magmar, which makes a Swarm deck more viable because there's less Plasma Storm and less Frostburn on the meta. So that's a perfect opportunity for a Swarm deck like this to slide right in and score some easy wins in a lot of games against players who are frankly not prepared for this type of development. As you can see, the deck offers a very low curve with 11 1-mana plays, 11 2-mana plays, and 9 3-mana plays. But it tops out with Revenants, and it has a couple of 4-drops in the middle to help ease the strain of losing cards. So right away, I've got Lilith. She's much better than Cassava at the Swarm strategy. That is because of her Bloodborne spell that lets her summon 2 Wraithlings. It's very important that this Bloodborne spell is used optimally, and that is to ensure that we have the most bodies on the board at the correct times. And I'll go over that when we do some replays. I'll talk about the timing of your Bloodborne spell. Blood Tier Alchemist. Now, this is a 2 of in my deck. I've seen other players use 3. However, because I'm running Sphere of Darkness, I've decided that I wanted the cycle more than I wanted the extra blood tier, and it's proven to be very okay. Feel free to experiment. Some people aren't even running Sphere in Swarm Lilith. However, I feel that there are just too many situations where Sphere can help you out. For example, when your opponent is in the corner with artifacts like Artifact Riva, that kind of thing, and you need that extra ping damage, or Sphere is needed to hit a Heartseeker, where in this case I would prefer to not just play the blood tier and then have it punched, but in this case I get to cycle through another card in my deck, and that's fairly useful in a game where there's not a whole lot of deck thinning going on. So that is the ratio that I've chosen because I prefer the cycle. You're welcome to experiment with that yourself, or not even run Sphere if you so choose. You could actually add in more 2-drops. For example, there are plenty of things out there like Healing Mystic and Primus Fist or Jaxi that you could experiment with if you feel like you really want to go all in. However, the utility of Sphere and the extra card draw I've just found to be too good not to run. Furiosa, this is very important for some tempo, because a lot of the times you'll be combining it with Wraithling Swarms, your Bloodborne spell, Gloom Chaser, and it lets you get a little bit more value out of those 1/1 tokens that you're usually putting out on the board. With Cryptographer turn 1 going second, it's a very fine card. You get a lot of body value on the board very early on that lets you take the initiative and start trading the way you want to, versus sort of just having a couple of 1/1s in the board that'll crash into something that's too big for them to handle. So very powerful card, can be used in situations as well where like you'll get a Blood Moon Priestess and a couple of these with like a Cryptographer or something, and then it's just game over, lights out. The opponent can't even deal with it. But it's mostly used just for a little extra value, and don't be afraid to sacrifice it sometimes if you have to. Zix is actually almost a better Gloom Chaser. The only reason that Gloom Chaser kind of edges out is the 2 attack power on 1 body can be a lot more productive than trading both of your Zix. So you net 3 attack out of Gloom Chaser versus the 2 attack out of Zix. However, Zix is more resilient to Scorn than Gloomchaser is, because you do lose one of the minions with Gloomchaser. But that does not take away from Zix's utility as well. Like combining both of them makes for great value, especially when you get lucky. Like, say turn 1, you play Gloomchaser towards a mana tile, and you get the lucky Wraithling spawn on a mana tile. Then you play a Zix on the other side. I've seen some crazy openers. Some people have also tried Dreamgazer in a deck like this. I find it's a little too aggressive and not useful enough. If I was running something like Darkfire Sacrifice, I might consider it, but I don't find it to be reliant consistent enough to run it in my list. The next and the last normal 2-drop is Cryptographer. That this card is just, it speaks for itself. It lets you get more bodies on the board with Lilith. It lets you proc Furiosa more. It's extremely flexible, and it's very solid at almost every stage in the game. It lets you body block more. It's just more swarm the better. So very, very, very good card in Lilith. And then 2 Shrouds. Don't be afraid to open with this sometimes if you have to, because it isn't actually that important that we have Shroud. It's only really good in matchups that I've been seeing a lot of lately, where certain Arcanists are worth dispelling, or like against Xerix that has been on the ladder a lot, you can dispel things like Obelisks and net a lot of tempo in that regard. And there's also a lot of situations where Ephemeral Shroud will hit Decimus against Starhorn or Mechazor. So don't be afraid to run a couple of utility cards like Shroud in a list that doesn't run any hard removal. Some people have run Ritual Banishing. I'm opting not to, and it's been just fine without it. Actually, I haven't missed it, because I'd rather be very proactive in a list like this than reactive, because the moment I start trying to play for board and not really just throwing my swarm at them is the moment I lose value out of all my weaker minions. So there's a lot to consider when you're thinking about running something like Ephemeral Shroud for Ritual Banishing. And that's what I've opted for. 3 Demonic Lures. That's probably the extent of the hard removal. One might say it's a soft removal, but it's also pretty useful when you're thinking about killing off a minion as well as proccing things like Deathfire, Crescendo, and Grimoire. Getting those backline threats into your Wraithling Swarms, or just getting an Ironclef out of your face. Very flexible card. Very good for tempo in a lot of cases, and has great utility in this deck. Now, I've got 2 Crescendo and 2 Grimoire. Why? Because I think it's too hard to get a board to run 3 of them. I think some people have all-in on the Crescendos and the Grimoires and like opted out of running things like Revenants, and I'm not a fan of that strategy, because 1 Scorn, 1 Tempest, and you're out, and Vanar and Magmar may be unpopular right now. Like, not unpopular, but less popular than they were, say, a week ago. But they're still out there, and your board is going to get cleared in a great percentage of your games very early on before you get a chance to really utilize these. And it's hard enough to get value out of them when you have just one of them in your hand. If you get stuck with multiples in your hand, I don't find that very fulfilling. So I've opted for the 4 and the two of each. It's been my personal preference for a long time with this deck, and I find that I can play to that condition rather successfully. You may find more success with your style if you play with more of them. However, I'm not a guy that likes to leave things up to chance as far as if my board is going to get value or not. My crap always gets removed, so I tend to just err on the side of caution and not clog my hand with cards that are no good without minions. Now Tiger's is straight utility. He's good for burn. Like, you go face with him. He's great to combo with Deathfire Crescendo turns. There's also just the added factor that it hits things like Circulus right now fairly well, and it's just really nice. Some people have run 3 before. I've run 3 before. Right now I'm trying 2 out because I don't really need it all the time, but it's definitely nice to have it available in the deck, because other than that, your only out-of-hand damage source will be something like Blood Tear, Sphere, or Revenant. no Void Pulses, and no Shadow Dancers to help proc your Wraithlings. So a little bit of damage I've found has just been very useful in a lot of different situations. Next, very obvious, Lilithe Swarm. It's just great for openings, and it's nice to surround people and it's great for replenishing your flood, your swarm after it gets removed by something. If you get your board wiped and you got Lilithe Swarms, you're back in the action. So that's what it's there for, and it's an all-around great card for this archetype. Blood Moon. Now this card isn't always played. Not every game is a Blood Moon game. It's hard to identify which games will be Blood Moon Priestess games and which games won't. Some games, like against Vanar for example, Blood Moon Priestess is probably a little risky. Frostburn's very popular. Same with Magmar. Plasma Storm's very popular. However, there are some scenarios where you just can't help but play the Blood Moon, and that's against like Xerix and Saj and other factions like Songhai, where it would take a lot of different tools to pull off a full clear after a Blood Moon play, and that's what she's really there for, is those matchups where the opponent just can't compete with the value of a Blood Moon. There are exceptions, of course, but the general idea is to get a Blood Moon and perfect protect it by placing it against a wall and then trading off Wraithlings and minions such that it gets surrounded by its generation of Wraithlings. And it's very good in those matchups where they don't have efficient answers to it. So I find this card to be very worth the inclusion in those types of matchups, because right now, if you're only playing against Vanar and Magmar, I might even suggest just cutting it, and maybe even cutting Sphere and then going like Dreamgazer and Jaxi, that type of thing. More smaller bodies to put on the board and get immediate value out of, whereas Blood Moon could just potentially get blown out by an AoE play. So it is successful in those matchups if they don't draw it, but you don't know what they have, so play it at your own risk. But it's definitely very good in our deck against certain matchups where they just can't compete with the efficiency of this threat generation. Spelljammer is my choice of draw. It's also just a solid body, 3/5 for 4. Very frequently played with my Bloodborne spell on 5 mana, and that's just to get value out of the card generation and threat diversity, which Spelljammer is a minion where people have mixed feelings about clearing, right? They take 3 to punch it, and then if they have to use something else, it's pretty good for trading, and you also go 1-up on card advantage because you draw an extra card the turn you play her, so you actually didn't lose anything. And it's just all around useful as a body, because it can also help Deathfire Crescendo plays if they weren't able to clear her as well as the smaller bodies. And that is my preferred choice. Right of the Undervault is the alternative that a lot of people have run in the past. You can see it here. However, thanks to its 6 mana, it's very hit or miss, and it's rather inconsistent on whether or not you'll even be able to play this card. And I've found it to be just too slow, and we should be setting up our win condition before we have the chance to even consider a Right of the Undervault. 3 Revenants round out the list as our highest cost minion. It's also the most impactful, and just very useful in games where we did get our board answered over and over, and we're kind of going back and forth, trading board for board over and over again. Then you just can chain Revenants out, hopefully, and win the game if you weren't able to successfully win it with a Crescendo or Soulgrimar. Given the amount of removal in the game, I've actually preferred to keep Soulgrimars over Crescendo, because it's less likely that a faction like Magmar will be able to ping me 3 times with the Soulgrimar equipped if, for example, I clear the board, then Soulgrimar and Bloodborne spell, meaning I put a couple minions on the board while also representing Soulgrimar. It makes it difficult for Vath to prioritize clearing the board and Soulgrimar, while Deathfire Crescendo could just be natural selectioned or thumping waved. So there are lots of different scenarios where these cards outweigh each other, and you just have to kind of get a feel for which matchups, which one is more successful. But that's the list. We'll jump into a game in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about the mulligans. Going first, you'll probably want to prioritize things like Zix, Cryptographer, Gloom Chaser. And secondary, if you have those, then also consider looking for things like Deathfire Crescendo, Soul Grimoire, and Demonic Lure. That's probably your top go-to. Blood Tier, Alchemist, Ephemeral Shroud, not that useful. Sphere of Darkness, you'd rather have a minion, but those would be the top considerations, I'd say, when you're going first and second. Second, you can go look for Wraithling Swarms. Also should consider Blood Moon Priestess as a secondary keep if you have a turn 1 play where you're able to generate multiple bodies, because that immediate 4 mana value play and getting a ton of minions on the board represents a large threat, and not many factions have an early answer to a large board of Blood Moon Priestess Wraithlings. So that pretty much covers that, and we'll jump into a game. Alright, so the first game we got here is against Faye. As you can see, S rank 30, pretty good player to be expected. So right away we're looking at the hand and we're seeing none of the cards that I mentioned, right? I talked about Cryptographer, Gloom Chaser, Zix. Those are the types of things that we want to be opening with, not our vulnerable Furosas and Blood Tier. Blood Tier particularly weak against Vanar just because they have Mana Death Grip and it's very free ramp for them. So we'll probably be kicking back the Revenant and perhaps Tiger. It's actually okay to kind of keep some of this, but I think the correct replace would have been to also replace Tiger there, but I think I did want to hold on to it out of consideration for Circulus, but then seeing that I was still forced into playing the Furosa or the Blood Tier, I actually commit to replacing it over Wraithling Swarm, and I think I should have just committed to replacing it in the mulligan. Now, I opt for the Blood Tier because I figure, well, he could either have Mana Death Grip or he could have Hearth Sister and Mana Death Grip anyways. So Furosa, I wanted to preserve Furosa for this Wraithling Swarm synergy. However, it's good for us that he didn't play a 2-drop. It's kind of fortunate, because even though we don't have much of a board state, neither does he, but the ramp is scary because that means Frostburn can come out any turn now. There's no one turn in between, it's any turn. So choosing to develop some threats, not all within the reach of him, because it doesn't really matter. We could have put more forward line threats, this one up here if we wanted to, but we're trying to get as many bodies on the board as we can and just cycle through our deck with that sphere, because we still don't have any of the Zix Cryptographers. But this is actually, it's just hell. Alcuin back gets my Sphere of Darkness, so he gets to clear one of these besides the punch. It also has a Mana Death Grip. It's nutty. So he's going to be on 8 mana next turn, 7 mana next turn. It's crazy. Already ramped out, looking very solid, has a backlined Arcanist, so I'm thinking, oh man, okay, it's just an Arcanist deck. He's still got 5 cards in hand. It's crazy. We still don't have too much to do. It's looking like a Furosa plus Wraithling Swarm now. It's really looking like a Furosa Wraithling Swarm. So we want to just kind of stagger our threats, try and prevent any Warbird value as best we can. It's also important that you Wraithling Swarm before you Bloodborne spell. That way you buff the Wraithlings that come out of it. So I'm just going to try and get in his business as much as possible. Frostburn, I can't afford to play around it. Whether he has it or not is completely up to him, not me. This is all I have to do. I have, like I said, I got clunky Deathfire Crescendo and Soul Grimoire in my hand. Not really representing any threats and without a board. So put as much threat as we can on the board at a time. These two kind of spawned out of reach. And fortunately he didn't have Frostburn. However, in this situation, it's still not looking very promising for us, just because you're thinking, oh man, so much is getting cleared. But actually, it's the opposite. Because that is the extent of his turn, clearing what is up here, we are able to go to Pound Town next turn with Lilith. Things get nutty, as this is suddenly revealed to actually be an aggro Fae deck. You can't tell right away because you only saw the Arcanist and the Mana Death Grip. But now, things are looking great. We replace Find a Demonic Lure, that lets us play a 3 cost and a 5 and a 2 cost. Our Bloodborne spell is down, so Furiosa is not the play. We can actually swing for like 12 damage here, I believe. It's easily a Grimoire. His Warbird is down. He just used a Flame Blood. We're going to put him so low that Flame Blood is not going to be a viable option. It's going to come down to basically Tigers. And to get rid of it, I'm also going to step in front of him here. So it goes kind of fast. Trade. We're going to step in front of him because some of these lists do play cards like Avalanche, and they might even be playing Vespers to help with Frostfire, because Frostfire is good in aggro Fae. You could tell he doesn't like this. Suddenly, what was such a small board state is now literally lethal next turn. That is how crazy these types of cards get out of hand really fast, and that is the power of this deck, built around Crescendo and Grimoire. Very small board state translated into very big damage. And he's basically just, desperate, looking for Frigid Corona, looking for ping damage. Finds Tiger. He's on 8 mana, but he's relegated to playing such small minions. Actually has a Cryptographer too, so he gets to ping off the whole artifact, but he's still only on 5 health, putting us down to 13 this turn. Now, I immediately move. I'm actually playing quite fast this game because, this has become habit to me, but you might even want to take some time to think about it yourself. Deathfire Crescendo could work out next turn. 2 cards. And we probably have a board because I got my Bloodborne spell, I got Furiosa, I have Blood Moon Priestess. We're going to get a lot of bodies on the board, and it's unlikely that he's kept something like Frostburn, even at this stage in the game. So what we're going to be doing is just putting as much threat in his face as we can, because he's so low that he can't afford to go face himself, and backlining something is probably a poor idea, since the idea that he's aggro is already revealed to us. We want to frontline as much of our aggression as we can, even if it's not normally a minion that goes to his face, because it could set up lethal quite easily. However, I was just speaking about it, how you want to be frontlining, and I think this is actually a mistake to put the Furiosa back here. I actually think putting Furiosa directly beneath or above would have been better, because with the Deathfire Crescendo, it could easily translate into a very quick lethal. This is not guaranteed to help me close out the game. These spawns were random, so they were not guaranteed to help me close out the game. I think if I'd put the Furiosa directly beneath her, I would have had better chances of just closing out the game next turn in general. So looking forward, I would definitely prefer to do something like that. Because our board is weak to AoE, it's probably better to try and guarantee some sort of damage. This spawn was also into Warbird, which should have been very obvious that I wanted to have Furiosa up in front. So, can't Warbird because he has to Tiger the Blood Moon Priestess, which is very fortunate for him. That's kind of why we put it in front, to force an answer, or to force the issue of damage. Doesn't have anything else. Can't go down there. That's lethal because of these minions. Only option is to put himself in the corner where Furiosa can connect. So we have 3 damage. We need 2 more. Crescendo, not guaranteed to do any damage. What we want to be looking, we'll keep the Cryptographer in case we don't get any damage, and then we can put more threats on the board, represent a surround in the corner kind of thing. So Crescendo, not looking to close out this game, find a Tiger. There's that flexibility. Could have found a Revenant. Very, very, very flexible card and allows us to close out the game. So it all kind of stems back to that swing turn we had where they denied our board throughout the entire game. They ramped very fast. They had a very strong lead in the mana department and the control department. But all because two minions stuck for us, and they left 2 minions that were vulnerable to it. We were able to swing for 12 damage with our Grimoire and find a way to close out the game immediately afterwards. So very strong. All right, game number 2. I've got a Magmar matchup, and this is an example of sort of the ideal hand, I think, for this list, almost against any matchup. The only thing that could change potentially is like substitute almost any card for a Demonic Lure or something, so you have a little bit more flexibility in controlling what minions go. But this hand is like an all keep, right? We have the Zix that will open to be playing around natural selection versus the Cryptographer, because we can always Cryptographer and Bloodborne spell next turn if we want. But this game is more or less to showcase just how nutty this deck can get as fast as possible, and that's the whole strategy. I mean, there's a very common theme of this deck can lose to Plasma Storm, but you gotta force it out of the opponent. Each game, we're not playing around it. We're just forcing the issue. It's like, do you have clear? Do you have clear? Do you have clear? Because this turn, it's actually the amount of threats that we put on the board is kind of redonkulous. We're going to use all the mana tiles, go double Lilithe Swarm. I debate on the Cryptographer, but I decided that surrounding him would be better. Because in this instance, Flash Macanter is problematic no matter how you look at it. So rather than the Cryptographer, surrounding the opponent is very key to actually guaranteeing value out of the Deathfire Crescendo. So already, very early on, I even decide that I want the Rage Binder to be put into an egg should it choose to punch anything next turn. That way I don't have to commit too many resources to it. And I'm willing to trade off half of the Zix for that value. So right now, obviously this is a very risky situation because this is how you lose, right? Or how you get kind of blown out is you have all your minions set up into like a Flash Macanter, and that will happen sometimes when you play this deck. But I don't think that playing around those types of removals is worth it. There was another concept where we could have Wraithling Swarm staggered it, like put our general up here, staggered them down this way, then put them down this way or something, and never touched the Rage Binder. That is also a valid line of play. However, I really wanted to force the issue of, do you have AoE? Because that would be 2 cards out of my opponent's hand. And this is the sort of decision making that makes this deck more pilot oriented rather than list oriented. Like, it's not very deterministic in the fact that you need to draw well. It's more or less your opponent needs to draw well to beat you or lose. And that is, it's got very definitive win conditions. It can win the game from these early board states as long as they go unanswered, and that is exactly the type of mindset that you should be playing this deck with if you choose to. That I'm going to win the game next turn or the turn after because my opponent didn't have an answer, and that's the type of heads-up play that you want to be doing. So I think, okay, he has the Flash Macanter. It turns out he actually doesn't, which is very good for us. That means we're going to get a ton of value. He actually chooses to trade off the Rage Binder into a Wraithling. Now, I actually kind of goof up this turn. I immediately DFC the Zix. It actually probably should have been this back row minion. The reason being, we want to keep him locked in place. Now, what should have happened this turn is DFC the Wraithling, step forward with Lilith, trade this into the Ragebinder, trade this into the Ragebinder, punch the Ragebinder, use this Wraithling to clear the egg, use the Zix to clear the egg, and then hit him for 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 damage. It would have been a lot of damage, and we would have had him surrounded. However, I make a slight tactical error. And this all comes from practice. I immediately realized my error. I would not have... I thought I was going to trade off all the Wraithlings into it and then punch the egg. And then I realized, oh shoot, what about this egg? So now you can see the inferior... Like, we even have less damage because I got less body clears. So it would have actually been 11 damage if I'd gone with the play that I just talked about prior to what I actually did. And that can come from experiences, noting, you know, where did I go wrong? Like, this is still a very massive board state, but it's not perfect. And it could have been perfect. He could have had nothing on the board. He could have been completely surrounded. So take the time to think about those types of situations when you find yourself in games that become more complicated than they need to be, like this one for me. This game became infinitely more complicated after I realized my error of trading in an extra Wraithling on accident. I should have punched it and then finished off the egg. Instead, I didn't have a body left over to kill the egg, and now he gets away. Thumping Wave. It's gonna crash into the Ragebinder. We're gonna punch he's gonna punch that Wraithling, and he's got a lot of health and a distance between us, and we don't have a win condition. So all because of that slight misplay. And it's very key to learn where you misplay in these types of situations so that you can pick yourself back up for the next turn or for the next game. So we replace the Cryptographer and find a Grimoire. I actually, when I was streaming this game, I actually go, man, I want a Grimoire. And this is the power of Grimoire over DFC, in that now, like I was talking about in the deck collection screen, when Vath is faced with something like a Grimoire, there's very few answers to it without taking an immediate bunch of damage. Like, he'd have to hit me and then play a Rush Minion and a Rush Minion, or a Blood Tier and a Rush Minion, or the young Rust Crawler, which is even more unlikely, because his hand is probably so full of diverse cards at this stage. Probably has Plasma Storm, Macantor for sure. We played into Macantor, but in this position, Macantor is a losing play because he'll just take too much damage the next turn. And that's exactly it. I think he realizes that he would be buffing my Grimoire, and the game is just done. There's no line of play that really gets him out of this, because even if he hits me, goes to 9, and then uses Macantor to hit me, and you know, I would still have a charge left, and that would be lethal. You can't deal with the artifact, and you can just kind of see it here. He just concedes. It's very common that in these types of situations your opponent concedes. That's the type of deck that this deck is it's very feast or famine in some scenarios, and right now in this meta, the deck is very feast, I think. As long as people aren't attacking for Swarm will have a successful win rate. And right now, that is what I've been playing, and that is what I think other people could enjoy playing. So thank you guys for watching. If you liked this video, you can, subscribe down below, follow my Twitch, all that stuff, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, tough cookies. So thanks guys, have a wonderful day.